Call the meeting to order. We properly noticed.
Meeting was noticed according to Wisconsin Open Meetings Law.
Roll call.
President Johnson.
Here.
Trustee Harding.
Here.
Trustee Holm.
Here.
Trustee Moody.
Here.
Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Seeger.
Here.
Trustee Wisniewski.
Here. All right, we'll start with citizen participation per Village Resolution 2017-01. Anyone wishing to address the Village Board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject must specifically relate to matters under the jurisdiction of the Village Board. Whether on the agenda or not, the Village Board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they're participating in a public hearing or if specifically allowed by a majority vote of the Village Board due to involvement in an agenda item. Going once. Going twice. Okay, I will close citizen participation. We'll move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Questions or discussion? I do have one question. Any concerns on cross-connection stuff with the mobile home park?
Not at this point.
Other questions, comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to miscellaneous business. Item 1, wastewater facilities plan. We have a presentation, and then we'll open the public hearing.
So we have Leo from Applied Tech here tonight to just give us kind of a refresher on facilities plan, where we're at, where we're headed. And Tom Pluis is also here tonight to help answer any questions.
I was going to say, this is like, when a microphone used to just be a thing, you just on, off. Now it's a computer now, and it's,
Okay, now I can hear. So my name is Leo Kusek. I'm with Applied Technologies, and we've been working on this facility plan for some time. Tonight's presentation, if you feel a little deja vu, it's because it's very familiar to some of you who saw this back in June. But there are slight updates based on what we've learned since then, and I'll make sure to point those out as we go along. So if you can go to the next slide. So first we're going to talk about, there's two components I want to talk about tonight for the facilities plan. We'll be talking about the wastewater treatment plant itself and the need for project there, as well as the lift stations, essentially to pump all the wastewater to the wastewater treatment plant. You see a picture in front of you with three things to kind of illustrate the parts of the plant that need some work. On the left, you can see on the preliminary treatment side for screening, Tom and his team have been making that screening work as best they can for quite some time, but frankly, it was never put in quite the way it ought to have been. Screening is essential to keep basically trash out of the rest of the wastewater treatment plant. If you look in the center, this is in Structure 30. Structure 30 is a large building with a dome on it where a lot of the actual treatment itself of the wastewater takes place. Structure 30 has suffered from a lot of corrosion over the years. Frankly, there's some hazards in there that need to be addressed to keep everyone safe. And then beyond that, it turns out there's quite a bit more tankage on site as of right now than what is necessarily the most efficient for the village to continue operating as. And so we're going to be looking at, obviously not taking away Structure 30, but essentially making this overall process more efficient by really focusing efforts on Structure 35. On the right, we see Tom's climbing along the back of the belt filter press. And so after a good long 20 years of service, the belt filter press, we're asking a lot for it to continue to separate out water from the sludge cake. What you don't see is some of the other improvements that are going to be required on the biosolids or sludge side to basically remain in compliance with the DNR's requirements for 180 days of storage. But all components throughout the plant, there's a lot of equipment that needs replacing. The good news is from a tankage standpoint and some of the other infrastructure items like that, we're going to be reusing as much of that capital equipment or capital structures as we can. So if you can go to the next slide. So in addition to the wastewater treatment plant, which is the main event when it comes to the upgrades within the overall wastewater facilities, there's also upgrades at several lift stations. The one you see in the middle is actually at the School Street lift station, and that design is currently ongoing. On the left and the right, I guess on the left we're looking over at Honey Creek lift station. This is an upgrade that's going to be very important, but we're also proposing for it to come in a few years, not immediately. And so that one we're thinking is basically near the end of the 2020s, maybe into early 2030s of when that work would actually be completed. On the right, that's actually a picture as well of the Honey Creek lift station, but it's really meant to illustrate some of the work at the wastewater treatment plant lift station. That's a project that makes a lot of sense to combine at the same time as the upgrades at the treatment plant. When you have contractors on site digging into the site itself to basically make those improvements for the lift station all in one, there's going to be economy of scale and mobilization issues that we'll be able to work through by having it all happen at the same time. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I think what a lot of people are interested in is, okay, how's this going to affect rates? And so what you're seeing on the slide is two bar charts. On the left shows the $188 in quarterly rates for the average residential user as of right now. And you can see that about half of it is out of operating and maintenance costs, the O&M costs, and another almost half is from debt service that is due to expire very shortly. What you see then on the right is we're assuming for now, at kind of a preliminary level, that those operating and maintenance costs are going to be pretty similar to what they are today. Now, there's some details that we'll get into later, because there will be some efficiencies on the aeration side. There will also be additional chemical costs. So at this level, we're basically calling that relatively even. But you can see in the three different colors there, kind of the relative scale of the new debt service that's going to be required for the treatment plant upgrade, since that's the lion's share in kind of the lighter blue. The treatment plant lift station in the darker blue, as you can see, is not insignificant, but it's much less than some of the other components. And then the Honey Creek lift station, the new debt service that's going to be required for that, basically would push rates all the way up to a total of $292 per quarter as compared to $188. What I will note on this slide is this is very similar to the slide you saw back in June, with the difference being that we took Brian's numbers from kind of a more comprehensive rate study than what we had come up with at first and applied those here. My perspective is that these are conservative compared to what we had actually initially been estimating. It takes into account potential for inflation and it doesn't take into account any real efficiencies when it comes to the plant operating going further. So, but that's the kind of increase in average residential user rates that we would expect to accomplish these improvements. And if you can go to the next slide, please. As far as the schedule, we're sitting here in October. My plan would be to basically allow 10 days after tonight's hearing for any other comments that might be coming in from the public. And once we get through that 10-day period, with the village board's approval, we will submit this facilities plan that's been available for public review. We will submit it to the DNR. That will start their clock for Usually it's 90 days. Sometimes they go a little bit beyond that. I think in this case, the plan reviewer that I expect to have, he's been very efficient. And so I would expect that we would essentially get comments back on this facilities plan before year end, which means then that sometime early in 2026, we could see ready to start design for kind of that phase one. There was a memo, Jason, that was able to go out, I think, for the board members?
Yes.
Okay, and so within that memo, we tried to basically boil down even the executive summary to even less, to really focus on the fact that we see the first phase of this project be the treatment plant upgrades, as well as the treatment plant lift station. That is the first phase of the project that we would anticipate starting design with board approval. And if we're able to do that, that means that basically within less than a year from starting design, we would be able to proceed on to the bidding phase and have a real dollar figure of what it's going to cost to move forward with construction once we actually have a bid. And from there, we're talking about a 2-year period, give or take, to actually complete that construction of that phase one. And this is the last slide, which had a link to the full facilities plan. What I'm holding here doesn't even have all the appendices in it, so there's quite a lot of detailed information in what has been available for the public for some time now. Jason, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple things. So can you go back to the schedule, please? So I just want to make sure that we're aware that we're looking to submit this to DNR tonight, and so that schedule before you is not set in stone when we submit to DNR. Neither is scope of project. That can all evolve. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is because we have not budgeted anything in '26 for design. And we really couldn't, because I haven't seen a scope. We haven't determined a scope yet, so it's hard for Applied Tech to give us a proposal to do design when we haven't figured out a scope. So now the sewer utility does have some reserves potentially that we could come back and ask for you all to approve a proposal for them to begin to some design. But I really didn't want to get into that until we had the chance to have this meeting and hear any thoughts from the board or the public.
This is just the treatment plant portion. That's what you're calling phase one, correct?
Treatment plant and then the treatment plant lift station.
Yes.
Yep,
Okay.
correct.
All right, and then could you go back up to the costs? Because I know in your pictures, you showed the School Street lift station. We're viewing those costs as being absorbed by the TID, so that's why they're not here, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions?
Okay, seeing no other questions, anything else presentation-wise? Otherwise, I will open the public hearing, so.
Was there anything in that memo that you wanted to? Okay.
I think I highlighted already.
Any comments from the public during the public hearing? Any comments? Third time, any comments? Okay, hearing none, I will close the public hearing. We'll move on to consider authorizing the submittal of the wastewater facilities plan to the DNR.
I'll make a motion to approve authorizing the submittal of the wastewater facilities plan to the Department of Natural Resources.
I'll second that.
All right, questions or discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much for coming back and walking us through it again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, item 2, review of 2026 operations budget, capital improvement plan, and financial management plan. So we've got item A, presentation of the financial management plan and draft 2026 budget by Ellers, and then review of the operations budget with possible directions to staff. So Brian.
All right. Any board members want old school paper copies? I do have those if you're, okay.
Yeah, we're firmly into the,
All right.
a quarter of the way through the 21st century.
So I just want to start out with speaking to some of the comments from the credit rating agency over the summer from the borrowing. One of the reasons for this is, right, understand that's a pretty firm external optics on the financials of the village and kind of overall standing. So one of the first elements I wanted to point out is some of the positives with fund balance. I think this is highly a result of, obviously, a lot of continuous long-range planning, as well as you have a very, strict policy in terms of what you want to do with fund balance when you do have it, and then also you assign that fund balance for specific purposes, so you know what you're going to do with it once you do have fund balance. So the point here on this chart just kind of shows all of your funds, so I want to identify that this is not just the general fund. This is the general fund, governmental funds, and enterprise funds, so the business type activities are your utilities. Then they look at that against kind of a AA median liquidity ratio, and this is all to say that you're above that median liquidity ratio when you include all of those. Now, one element to that is partially the sewer utility, which you do have a planned use of fund balance. So I would say you'd be coming back down to that median as those project costs are expended and you're using those funds. However, the plan would be obviously to keep at this positive place and continue with that in terms of our long-term plan. But just kind of wanted to point out, if there's a chart that's important in that rating document, this is the one that I found most suitable. Continuing on there, we do provide some other factors in terms of comps to other communities. There's a lot going on here, so I'm not going to kind of dive into every number, but we pulled some communities that are of similar rating and or in the area. So you can kind of check that out in terms of where you sit with other communities. The one thing I'll kind of say that you'll probably see echoed throughout when we get to the other rating considerations on the next slide is, your population is, one of the lower ones compared to some of these comparables, but you do have high, gross income, and then also kind of low debt per capita, overall debt numbers, and then that, again, kind of undesignated general fund balance as compared to operating revenues in a healthy place as well. So just kind of wanted to set the stage. I know we looked at this last year. If you have any questions on that, certainly happy to answer them, but those, are some good takeaways to kind of see how you compare. A lot of what the rating agency does is look at you against your peer group, right? And then kind of say, how do you fit in? And with the improvement that's happened over time, that was part of the reason the rating agency a couple of years ago actually increased the rating in the village, which allows you to get lower interest costs when you go out to market. And then the most important part is always kind of looking at what the rating agency is willing to opine on, things that could help and things that could hurt. The first one, you have some control over, but at the end of the day, could be governed by other outside factors like the economy, et cetera. But, they always say increase your tax base and increase your resident income. And obviously that would be amazing to do with a light switch, but that doesn't happen that easily. But just understand that's one of the ones. It kind of shows up on everybody's rating report. The other one is the long-term liabilities. This is basically to say, this includes the utilities, the general fund, everything as well, but try not to overexhaust in terms of how much debt you have outstanding, hence why we do the long-range planning. But just note, this is why they kind of want you to govern that because, right, you're trying to achieve the first one. Sometimes you have to build it for them to come, right? And if you overextend yourself, you can certainly, see why that could cause trouble in the eyes of a credit rating agency. The downgrade, obviously they kind of talk about the inverse of those liabilities when they talk about the second bullet point in leverage. And then the other one, though, is kind of that decline in fund balance or liquidity near 50% of revenue. So that's kind of the one that we know we can control, that is on all of the funds, is kind of shown in that chart. So it's all to say, when we do decide to use fund balance, we want to be careful not to go below kind of their criteria. So then we'll get into kind of the budgeting exercise at hand here tonight, outside of the external optics. All communities are subject to levy limits. What that means is, right, the biggest source of revenue that a local government has to use in order to continue operations and improve its services is the tax levy. That is controlled wildly by net new construction, but there's also, you could be subject to other adjustments. Primarily, those other adjustments that may or may not be applicable from year over year for the village is the debt adjustment. You can basically claim whatever you need for debt service, as those are exempt from levy limits on an annual basis. And then also, when you do have a joint fire district, if you meet certain criteria, you could be eligible for that. But essentially, the way to think about this, as you're trying to understand what are levy limits, I would just kind of pay attention to the orange box. It's how much did we levy last year net of debt, because that gets subtracted out. You add that net new construction percentage. That's your new, what we call your base levy or pre-adjustment levy. And then whatever you need for debt, you just add back in for your upcoming budget year. So again, that net new construction is what grows your base levy and more or less funds operations. The debt adjustment is kind of a go grab it as you need it. Knowing how important net new construction is, this is a chart that comes straight off the Department of Revenue's website. The bars is the equalized value, which is the left-hand side in terms of total value. The orange line is what I want you to pay attention to. I can't separate these when I'm screenshotting the DOR's website. So understand that orange line is net new construction. That's tied to the right-hand side of this chart. Seeing how volatile net new construction can be, you can understand that this makes it hard, right, for municipalities to always budget and expect what this net new construction will be each year, right? You can keep track of building permits, other things like that to get a sense, but when we start showing the future planning beyond the 2026 budget, I just kind of want to point out there's a reason we're conservative, and it's because you have some low years, right, that we want to make sure that we're planning for ahead of time. Even if we have the expectation for a development to happen, certain delays could happen, et cetera. So, while a percentage is one thing, we kind of like to show what this means for dollars historically. So, for example, your low year here was 2022 net new construction. So for the 2023 budget, you're allowed 0.7%. That basically means you can increase your base levy by $16,000. Now, in my mind, obviously this doesn't operate like a private business, but you do have, over a $3 million operation here, and you're only really allowed to increase by $16,000. That's really not that much. So to understand the constraints that levy limits place annually, hopefully that's shed some light. There is obviously then the good years, right? 4.6% the following year, which allowed for 107% or $107,000 increase. So can be hard for a municipality, right, to seek those expectations moving into the future. But this is why we kind of like to pull the reins back when we go in beyond the budget planning to say, what if we do only get our low years and kind of financially stress test the village to see what levers we might be able to pull to make sure that you continue to fund your operations. So again, this is converting the net new construction percentage to kind of the buying power it presents.
Brian, sorry, real quick, were those were budget years, so then the 2023 4.604, that was then
2024 budget, yeah.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
that was going into the 24 budget, okay.
Yep. So yeah, it's like the value created for 1/1/25, for example, you just got 1.1 net new construction. So for the 2026 budget, it's $27,903. This is a historical perspective of, your levy, the valuation, and then tax rate history. So what we're trying to achieve here is understanding how much levy you've needed, right? That's kind of, and then by category, so general fund, capital projects, other special revenue funds, and then the debt service to build your total levy need. Now understanding that generally the capital projects, you're kind of grabbing as you have opportunity to. That tends to be the most movable object for a community. It's much easier to move a project than a person in terms of a salary versus, right, a piece of equipment. So we net out that debt and capital projects because one, we can claim the debt, and two, the capital projects are easier to move. So to just get a sense of total levy need, net of debt as well, I provided that under that first bold line. The allowable levy kind of shows where you've sat with allowable levy, right? Understanding we've been able to fund kind of what we need with our base levy, and primarily any leftover base levy we've been applying to capital projects. So you'll kind of see that where it says base levy surplus or deficit, that line, it tends to match 1-to-1 what your capital projects levy was for that budget year. So you're basically saying we fund what we can with operations. If we have leftover base levy, we're applying that to the capital projects fund. And then for the debt service, kind of claiming what you need, there's a few, levers that you can always reach for. We'll kind of talk about that for the future planning, as when you look at total allowable levy has always matched your levy need. Underneath that, you technically can claim more for debt if you wanted to, but communities really only use that in kind of a emergency situation, or when they're realizing, oh, we had a bad net new construction year, we kind of do need a Band-Aid, we can go grab this additional debt adjustment. This is all to say you still have additional levy capacity to the italics numbers where it says additional allowable debt adjustment. But insofar, right, you haven't had kind of a year where your base levy hasn't been enough to fund operations. Then finally, at the bottom, what we're looking at is a tax bill impact over time to just kind of show where the tax bill and tax rate has been. So we provide the historical assessed value. Tax bills for the village are based off of TID-out assessed value against your total levy that builds your tax rate. Then we grabbed a sample property value, one that, kind of came close to $200,000 that I could quickly find on GIS, and just kind of looked at that sample tax bill history over time. Their dollars would be different, but their tax bill delta by percentage, so that bottom line, should be pretty similar for everybody, right? Depending on your assessment value, though, your tax bill dollar change could be different. So that's pulling that historical perspective. So overall, you've kind of started at $1,200 for this individual property, ended at $1,200 for this individual property through last year's tax bills. So moving into the 2026 budget in terms of your levy components, right, we kind of broke those down by the categories. Previously, as I mentioned, for any capital levy, it's subject to levy limits in that there's no special exemption. Hey, we need to buy a piece of equipment. We're going to claim it on the worksheet and go grab that levy when we need it. So it is subject to levy limits, but it is the movable object. So far, you've been able to fit it in to help fund the capital projects fund. But again, if there is a need to move something, right, generally communities will move the capital levy first and then do what they need to after that point. And then again, for debt service, that is not subject to levy limits. We did show the full multi-year financial plan in a previous, I believe it was in June, presentation. So in terms of your general and operating funds kind of revenue methodology, how do we build to what the allowable levy and our levy need is? Generally, you're looking at, what are your expenses and what are the non-levy revenue sources? And then whatever's left over that's kind of your levy need, and then you weigh that against your allowable levies. So the methodologies we've used is hold those non-levy revenues flat, or consistent with trends outside any known adjustments. A few years ago, we got legislation passed that added to state shared revenue, so that was a benefit to your non-levy revenue sources. Your expenses, we kind of talk about on a later slide, but right, expenses minus those non-levy revenues, that's how we know what our levy need is. And then we weigh that against our allowable levy. So this year, I added an 8 at the end because I can't apparently do numbers, but 27,903 should be the number there. That's kind of your allowable increase to your levy last year. So general fund summary, just kind of looking at revenues against expenditures, comparing 2025 to 2026. We have total revenues that are increasing by about 70,000 there. And then in terms of expenditures, we're increasing by that same amount. And then for the most part, we have the offset of that 27,000 in the allowable levy limit increase, and then the increased costs in terms of just expenditures. To try to quickly highlight changes there, you had increased costs against all categories outside of culture and rec, and I know you're following agenda items to talk about this in more detail. In terms of the full levy summary, so now we're comparing, what was shown on that a couple of slides ago for the 2025 budget to the 2026 budget. Overall levy increase of about $64,000. The majority of that increase, however, is just the debt service, right? We added a new debt issue in 2025, hence we have new payments coming up in 2026. So overall, net of debt and capital, you've actually decreased your levy need by $41,957 and have an overall increase of $64,164. So kind of how does that fit in with your allowable levy? You have a current base levy, so pre-adjustment of $2.480 million. And in order to kind of meet that levy need shown on the previous slide, you can just use that additional debt service adjustment, and then if the joint fire adjustment was applicable, that's another one that you could add as well. But for now, we've just shown the debt service adjustment plug to kind of meet that allowable levy need as shown on the right-hand side there. So again, the whole goal is, can our draft budget need meet our allowable levy? That answer is yes. So when we go meet that allowable levy of 2.8 million and change, how does that kind of impact the tax bill? So one thing here, we do have kind of a unique year, right, going through a reval. While that adds taxable value, therefore decreasing the tax rate, when I take that sample property and show their new assessment, and so this is the bottom right orange, right? You have new taxable value going up to 612.2 million, and then a decreasing tax rate. The residential class, just considering the current economy, right? The housing prices are increasing. When you do a revaluation, you're taking, your assessed value up to the fair market value, so essentially what you could sell your house at. Based on the opinion of the assessor, this individual property increased its assessed value by almost 100,000. So that's almost 50%, right? So a pretty big increase. A lot of the residential class, and speaking with staff, that is pretty consistent across the board, and is actually pretty consistent in terms of the communities that I serve. Just noting anecdotally, I'm seeing this a lot. I've seen some go 35%. I've seen some go 100+%. But that said, even though there's a tax rate decrease and a pretty minimal levy increase, the overall sample property tax bill for this individual property is about an 8% increase, or about $100 for the annual taxes for the village. Again, the other thing I'll mention, we're only talking about the budget you control, This isn't talking about the county, the school, or the tech college, right? They can, anybody concerned with those impacts obviously can go attend those meetings. But the point here, I did want to, say we did run an analysis to kind of say, what if the levy was actually flat? Meaning you make no change to what you're going to tax from the 2025 amount, meaning we levy the 2.771 million that you did last year. The tax bill would still change by 5.6%. So really, this 2026 draft budget impact is only 2.45%, and then you're just getting the reval impact on top of that to get to your 8% impact. So I know that's a lot of information and probably nerdy assessment math. Any questions on kind of how that's impacting in terms of the reval, because it's pretty unique as compared to some of the previous year's FMP presentations. Okay.
I guess with the piece that I'm a little lost on, if levy was flat,
Yeah.
go back to explain where's
Sure.
the 5%? I get, and we're talking about I guess the average or median, property, right? Everybody's property and bill is going to be unique. So is it because the mix of allowable, I guess, some of those other lines would change other than the 2.7?
So just imagine a scenario where you pass the 26 budget where the total levy for the village was 2,771,000, what is that, 723? So the same levy that you did last year, for this property, they would still see a 5.6% increase to their tax bill. So it's all to say, like, trying to point out the impact of the reval alone, it's 5.6%. And I would say the residential class is generally going to see that. It could be different, right, from property to property. A few we pulled had a assessment change of 45% instead of the almost 50% here, but this is like, I think 47%, and another, on average, they're all falling in line, just under 50%. So the revaluation and the increase in their individual assessment, even if you had a flat levy, they're going to see a 5.6% increase to their tax bill just for the village
Because the
portion.
residential portion of the overall equalized value
Oh, sure.
outpaced
Yes.
the
Sorry.
business.
Yep.
So their portion, so all of our residential, our portion of the pie as the residents.
Correct. Yep.
Increased faster
Yes.
than the business portion. Therefore, if the levy, how much we tax the whole community, remains the same, the pie distribution changes because of that.
100%. Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
No,
But
that-
yes,
okay.
yeah, of the overall change to the value, taxable value of the village on an assessed basis, the residential class saw a bigger chunk of that than the other. Yep.
So I understood that, but because this is going to be a big question, I want to make sure that you all, if that wasn't clear.
Believe it or not, it was clear.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I've sat through
'Cause-
so many sessions. Thank you for
Yeah, just because I neglected to remember, and I know too, the manufacturing portions rarely keep pace with what we would think that they would be, and that's just how the state tends to do it with equalized value, right?
Right. When I see the final statement of assessment, I'll probably send staff a note on, just looking at the changes of the individual assessment classes, because you could see it there. The other thing you'd have to remove, and this is kind of why I have to send it once I see that, is the new construction in each of those. But a lot of times, in one that I just sent to a different community, what we saw is the residential classes, making up a wild chunk of the 100%. It was about 70% of the change, right, for this community. It seems for East Troy, we're kind of landing around 50% in terms of the total change, but that's just kind of the unfortunate economy that we're in now. And generally, I would imagine that's because, too, the commercial assessments really are staying flat in the assessor's opinion in terms of there's not a lot of fair market value, just not a lot of commercial sales as compared to, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it might be. So. Then the expenditure restraint program, so this is something I just kind of wanted to always keep on the radar anytime we do a budget analysis. You are now out of this program because they have a weird rule that it's based off of a TID out equalized value mill rate, so it's not your TID out assessed mill rate, it's on a fair market value for the TID out. You're under 5 mills there, so it's basically your fair market value of all the properties outside of TIDs have increased so much, and you haven't been able to tax enough for that the state is now saying you get less shared revenue, as weird as that sounds. But they are saying that you're kind of out of this program. This is all to say you've kept your general fund budget, though, within the parameters here, which I think is a fair point to make. It should have, obviously been pretty clear when I showed the levy category, the levy change by category, you're obviously decreasing. So you've been pretty strict on your expenditures, obviously, but hopefully this should add additional light to that fact. But again, you don't get any benefit here because now your TID out EV mill rate is too low. So. In terms of initial assessments on the 26 draft budget, before I get into the future planning, there's an opportunity, right? You could increase the base levy, increase your capital to the base levy surplus deficit net of debt. So you do have an additional $34,500 you could add. The resultant tax bill impact, the tax rate goes to $4.69 instead of an 8% increase to the tax bill. It's a 9% increase to the tax bill. This is something that we always, each year that we've talked about this, should always be done once your final assessment is known. However, this can provide a good guidepost so that we can quickly react to that final statement of assessment that we get in early November. If you're interested in at least seeing a draft budget like this, and then certainly any other adjustments. So I guess if the board has any input on that now, we would take it. Otherwise, I can move into the future planning.
This is in your memo, right? Do you want to talk about it now, or?
We can talk about it.
Okay. Do you want to maybe switch to your memo? Or, okay, yeah, let's come back to this.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
We
Yep.
got it in Eileen's memo here in a minute.
Okay. So we do this future planning for the reasons stated there. I've kind of said this for, I think, 9 years now that I've been helping you guys with this, so we can go past this. But again, we want to make sure that we're kind of planning for all of these elements. So we can go to the next slide. These are, beyond the 2026 budget. For the cost categories, we categorize each line item in your individual funds, and then we make an assumption on a linear trend for increasing these for the 2027 budget, 28 budget, right, and so on. So those are kind of the increases we've used there by category, and a lot of them follow the trends that we've been seeing, as well as staff input on those to use for the plan. And that kind of sets up a way to, again, the purpose of this future plan is we do want to intentionally stress test the finances of the village to kind of see, do we have a levy limit cliff here? So we basically adjust that capital levy when we run out of room in our base levy in this plan. So if you just follow your eyes on the capital projects line, which is the second row, there, you would run out of ability to levy for capital projects under the methodology in which you've been doing so in the 2029 budget. Because one of the things we're doing is we're using the allowable base to only increase by about 0.9%, which is 50% of your 5-year average, right? Like I said, we want to be conservative there and not assume that we'll just have boom years of net new construction. But if you're kind of wondering what's the cliff, 2029 is the answer there. But again, if you decided, right, we actually still do want to levy for capital projects fund, the bottom lines should help you provide that. So we would have additional authority to levy for capital projects under the allowable debt adjustment. Obviously, that would have tax bill implications that you want to consider each budget season like we're doing right now. The other element, though, is when does our additional debt capacity in terms of this adjustment actually get lower than our base change net of debt? And that happens in the 2030s. So this is all to say, if you kind of have 4 straight years of bad net new construction, obviously it stands to reason the budget decisions are going to be harder, but you could start to really, have to make some considerations for where, the general fund and those other special revenue funds operating budgets go at that time. In terms of the tax bill impact, I think since we're stress testing and not really allowing, too much of the impacts in terms of increasing that capital projects fund levy or even keeping it flat, it does show kind of a decrease in tax bill for that reason. In addition to that, there's, future debt shown with, of course, unknown interest rates at this time, because I can't predict 4 years from now what the interest rates would be. But that said, right, we're adding debt service as well in 2030, so that's kind of the reason you see a bigger tax bill impact on the bottom line starting in the later years. But in the earlier years, we're kind of, again, stress testing, so kind of limiting what you can do with the levy, which is kind of cooling off and leveling out that total tax bill impact. And then this is just breaking out the total tax rate by category. So if somebody asks kind of how much of our mill rate is for debt for the 2026 budget, it is 64 cents if you kind of go to the second to last line in blue there. Or for example, does that shift in the future? The answer would be yes, right? When we issue debt, in 2029 with payments starting in 2030, the debt service is about 79 cents of the $5.29 tax bill in the future. So this is something you've had in prior years that we've just continued to update so you can get a breakout of your total mill rate and kind of see what is it paying for. And then this is just a lot of numbers, but a simple message. Do we get out of the TID-out EV mill rate to maybe qualify for expenditure restraint in the future? That answer is no. Obviously, we'll continue to evaluate this as we go, but just on a projection basis, that answer is no. So, with that, I can take any questions or discussion.
I just had a quick one here. So if
Yeah.
you look at, so you said it's all in the red there, the 443, 437? Yeah, that red line?
Yep.
But then, and maybe I missed something, but 2 slides before that, it's showing 529, 557.
Sure. So that's your assessed tax rate. That's actually your actual tax rate. The TID-out EV tax rate is taking the fair market value of that same TID-out, those same TID-out properties, but it's fair market value. So each year, right, the fair market value will increase and your assessed value will stay the same outside of any new construction until you do another reval. But that's kind of the TID-out EV conundrum and why we don't understand why the legislature kind of limits the expenditure restraint program to this, because it's not a tax rate used for anything. But that's why it's the difference between true tax rate versus TID-out EV mill rate, which is only used for expenditure restraint. Yeah, and slightly lower because it's got a higher numerator that it's dividing from.
I'd like to go on the record to say that these rules are dumb.
I didn't say it.
And you don't have to go back to it, but I think you talked about the rating agencies and kind of what they're looking for. We talk about the budget as a whole. We finished just talking about the wastewater treatment. That's got its own revenue outside of the tax bill, all of those things. I would like to, I've talked with Eileen about this just the other day, I would like to, once we're done with this budget, talk about at the beginning of our process next year, like what's the 1 or 2 page like metrics version, view of this, right? So you've got some, nice graphs. It's like, we want our fund balance at, the 35%. We have that in policy. And when we go above, that's good, but then we usually take that and then we apply it to the capital fund and, and that's what we want to do. But, if we start seeing it, it's trending below, or the forecast is, those types of things. And then same thing for some of these debt percentages. I know for a long time before equalized values really just skyrocketed, we looked at that, what's our allowable debt limit, right? We set a policy of 50%. Well, we can keep taking out debt and yet the equalized value far exceeds how fast we're taking out debt. Well, yeah, our debt usage is going up and yet that percentage is going down. So I'd like to understand and see kind of the debt by the revenue types, right? So like, within the TID or within, the utilities and things like that, so that we're, when we say, we're taking out a bunch of debt for a fire truck, that's a different type of debt than it is, we're taking out debt for a wastewater lift station that's being paid for by TID dollars. So ratepayers aren't paying for it.
Right.
And taxpayers aren't paying for it versus we're doing the wastewater treatment plant, ratepayers will pay for that.
Yep.
But that's not on your tax bill. So I think how do we simplify that really complex set of statements into,
Sure.
1, 2, 3 pages of like KPI type view of things.
Certainly.
Dan, it's your first rodeo. You good? Brian, it's your first one too, I think. Yeah. Okay. So we're on to Eileen's memo here. Thank you, Brian. And so she's going to walk us through where that question about the $30-something thousand and what we want to do there is in this too.
I won't get too into depth reviewing the memo. Brian just reviewed a lot of materials, but if there are questions as I'm going through this, please stop me. I started out by showing you the levy by fund and the comparison to last year. The thing I wanted to point out is we were able to levy more for capital again this year, so we're just under $400,000. So that was a real win in this budget to me, and we still have the ability to levy about $34,000 more and still be within levy limits. The big thing to note on the revenue side, we had an increase in our transportation aids of $40,592 this year. That was the largest increase in any revenue in the general fund, and largest increase I can remember in transportation aids. So that was a real positive. We made some adjustments to interest on our investment accounts. I don't really like to rely on that income. We try to be very conservative, but we've been quite a bit under budget, so we thought it was time to adjust that. Building permits, same thing. We've been seeing larger trends in building permits than we've been budgeting for, but you always have to remember we budget 75% of that revenue as an expenditure. That's how our building inspection services are paid. And school liaison officer revenue also increased by $15,200. That's just due to a change in staffing and health insurance coverage for that officer. The assumptions in the budget are we have 11% increase currently in health insurance, and I just want to caution the board that we haven't received our actual increase yet. That's pretty typical of this time of the year. We're waiting. We're expecting them by mid-October. And I had shared some of the trends they're seeing, but these are all with other carriers, so it's really anyone's guess. But the thing I always remind the board of is we are small group community rated, so when we get our health insurance increases, even if we had a 0% rate increase, The village would still see increases because a small group community rated is based by the age of every person that's insured. And we always get older every year, and that means our rates go up. So there's always a little more, even though I might say the rate actually only went up 5%, the village is going to see a higher than 5% increase due to that factor. The salary adjustments that we have incorporated into the budget, I had initially asked the board for permission to incorporate the 2.4% for the salary structure increase and 2.9% for those who are within the performance range. I typically like to compare to the Cottingham Butler Salary Planning Survey, which was prior Carlson Detman. That's who does our market updates for our salary structure and who did our original study. I was happy to see that Wisconsin Public Sector is at 2.4% for the projected structure increase for the Southeast region is 2.3%, I'm sorry, and 2.4% is Wisconsin overall. So I feel like what we included there as our assumptions can remain the same unless the board feels differently. I think that was a accurate prediction. Represented employees, that would be the police union, that has not been settled yet. The library board had voted for a 3% increase. So the increase throughout the entire budget, including the enterprise funds for wages, was $62,477, and $34,817 of that are in funds supported by the levy. So just note that compared to what you see as your levy increase. So that's where that real strain is. We're local government, we're a service operation. I always remind the board again that labor costs are our most significant cost because we're a service organization. So that's where you see that strain a lot of years with what that levy increase is. And then I just go over some general reductions that we made in expenditures. I'm not going to review these in detail. Does anybody have any questions on those reductions that we were seeing? The most significant thing I would point out, though, is some of that levy availability is due to the levy being decreased by $30,599 for the airport. Last year, the airport did have a capital project we had budgeted for $25,000. So that's a huge chunk of why you're seeing that decrease.
Speaking of the airport, I did just get the CIP late last week from the BOA. So now I think the impacts will be minimal because, as you remember, those projects are all 5% local share. But I need to review that with you.
Are you going to tell me that we don't have as much levy as we think we do?
I know we have some capital in there for a project already. I think if there's any adjustment, it's pretty slight.
Okay.
So are we setting aside that delta on the capital? How are we doing operationally now that we're running the airport with internal staff and the increased fuel sales? Are we improving in our self-sufficiency?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the additional revenue that we're getting in the FBO hangar by renting that out to the mechanic, I think fuel sales are lighter than we had projected or hoped maybe. But I mean, I think we're going in the right direction, I guess, to answer your question.
Okay, the one increase I wanted to point out was in other contracted services within the administration department. We did budget the $9,500 to do the market update for our salary structure, which would be implemented January 1st of 2027. In the capital budget, we do, if you review the actual budget document, that fund is not balanced currently. We are going to review, since we did have additional levy available, shift some of the funding sources from reserves to levy. So we have to go through that exercise, and there's a couple other things we'll probably need to adjust in there. And I also had explained in my memo that we will be reducing the amount of fund balance that we had projected utilizing in the original draft, because we did find out a few things. The Playmore Park restrooms did not receive the grant for $250,000, so we are removing that. We're putting that in a future year. The roof replacement on the building, our insurance is covering it at replacement value, so that was a $150,000 expenditure we had budgeted for that we're able to remove from reserves, so that was a real positive. There is going to be 93,000 though that will be added into that prior year surplus usage. We had set aside funds for the ambulance purchase. So you'll see those adjustments in a future draft. The direction that we're looking for is what we had talked about, that extra levy that's available, that's just over $34,000. I don't think I was certain of the exact amount when I drafted this. So the board could opt to apply that to capital projects so that we're using less reserves. You could opt not to use it to keep a lower tax rate, and we just adjust our debt adjustment this year. And then I just did want to caution that a portion that might be necessary if we find out our health insurance rates are higher than anticipated, or if the union contract settlement necessitates, those adjustments. So I'm looking for that direction from the board if you want us to apply that extra levy. Otherwise, our option, if we need additional levy and we're not applying that extra levy, is going to be to reduce capital projects levy.
I would say, we'll see where, the airport CIP comes in, what you learn on insurance, what you need to do, what the final number ends up being. And given the fact that we've got to what our conversation with Brian about the impact to the residents, I would say take it and reduce the rate.
Well, and how's the union negotiation going? Are we in negotiations right now?
Yeah, we're going to discuss that in this session.
Okay.
So to clarify, we'd like to reduce the rates given the impact on residents because of the shift in the assessment classes. So if the health insurance rates go up, do we want to take that from the $399 capital levy or from this 34 and then whatever's remaining?
I think this is your first lever. I'd like to try to stay at that 400,000 for capital levy. I think that's a big win for us here. So let's see what those come in. Now, if the CIP for airport and these health insurance and, our negotiation, if that chews all of this up, and then more, then we can have that conversation about reducing then the capital or doing something else. But yeah, that's how I would approach it. What do you guys think?
I agree. There's a few unknowns, and until we get a better handle on those, then we can make a decision.
Okay, I'm hoping by the next meeting we'll have a couple more knowns.
What about the wastewater design for next year? You said you didn't have any money in for that?
So we have not budgeted anything. Like I mentioned, we do have some reserves in that utility, so that's where I would probably look towards it. We're also going to have a discussion about rates, so.
Can you go back to the zoning, the 5,000 for the zoning administrator? That's for Orrin, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Should we reevaluate our rates for applications and what we push back to people, to applicants, to try to reduce that impact on our general fund?
We could, yes. We can look at, that would be strictly the application fees, though, because any services that he's providing to review somebody's application is already billed to them. So it would be specifically for conditional use applications, or we don't charge a fee for site plan applications at all, which is, I think, a little unusual, but then they get charged for all of his review services as well as the engineers.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the standard, I think we should try to adopt the standard to offset our need to absorb that. So because have we already approved the fee rate schedule, or, so this would be a part of that? Okay.
Correct. That comes closer to the end of the year because we do it as of the January 1st, the new rates.
And then my last question was the state aids. That increase was because they've tied this better now to sales tax, which then I guess is an index to inflation now, right?
Correct. Brian, is that adjustment only to that additional state aid that we get now?
Only the CMA.
Okay, yep. So the additional state aid that they recently approved, that's what we're getting that adjustment to. So that amounts to the 2,000 and some odd dollars.
Other questions, comments, suggestions?
I just wanted to acknowledge, I know this was a lot of work that the administrative staff put into it, and all the people that worked with it, and Brian. Compared to what we used to do in preparing budgets, this is a lot better. Thank you. Very well thought out, I think, very respectful of the citizens regarding rates, so appreciate what was done in putting this together.
Yeah, the last thing I was going to say is, looking at what's happening in other municipalities and counties and stuff, these are all difficult budgets right now. And you see in the areas, to Mary's point, where the municipalities, those government entities are going through this process, this is a much better outcome than the ones who aren't. And so, as you said, 9 years, you said we've been doing this. So that just, it wasn't always like this for Brian and Dan. So this is, really great, and it's a lot, and it's difficult when we have these conversations about rates for sewer or, tax rates, or the, residential portions of the pie have increased more than the businesses, but these, we're not looking at adding tons of new services. We're not going on a building spree that's not within a TID, things like that. Those are the, that's where I think people get stuck and they get, have problems. So, and I know you guys are constantly looking for opportunities to control those costs because you know that those rough net new construction years are coming. So thank you to all three of you as department heads. So you don't need a motion on anything, right?
Nope, I just needed that direction on that additional levy, and I have a clear understanding of what you're looking for, so.
All right.
good.
Consider updating the Highway 120 multi-use trail Phase 2 and direct staff regarding the termination point. Jason?
Okay, so we've got Kurt with us tonight from Kapoor. They're the firm that's designing Phase 2 of the multi-use trails. Phase 1 went from the Honey Creek Bridge to Brookstone subdivision, and we're looking to pick up there and continue Phase 2 all the way out to Honey Creek Road and some of the residential areas out there. So Kurt's just going to update us on where design's at, and then we've got some questions.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Kurt Fahrenkopf with Kapoor & Associates, project manager for the project. Just a quick update on where we are in the process. We are at basically what's called 60% or preliminary design. We're just about ready to submit our preliminary design and the design study report that goes along with that. Our environmental document has been approved. That was done in July of this year. And we held our public involvement meeting in late June of this year. Coming out of that meeting, we had some residents from the town of East Troy that were in attendance, as well as the town chairman, and we were talking with them about the need for getting into an intergovernmental agreement with the town because a portion of the trail along Honey Creek Road is actually in town right-of-way.
Can you scroll down to that map,
Oh, I'm
please?
sorry, did I jump ahead
Just
there?
for
Okay.
reference.
Yeah.
The town properties are the ones in green.
Yeah, so we put it together, this exhibit. So coming out of that meeting or that discussion between the village and the town has determined that they would not wish to see the trail run along the south side of Honey Creek Road there's basically 3 parcels that are highlighted, shaded in green, even though the trail is in existing right-of-way, no new right-of-way acquisition would be needed. The town still has jurisdiction of that right-of-way. So coming out of this discussion with the town, we were looking at 2 alternatives on the project for the portion of Honey Creek Road from SH 120 is on your left-hand side there, and north is up. The first alternative is called Alternative 1, is just discontinuing or stopping the proposed trail on the south side, keeping it on the south side of Honey Creek Road, but stopping it at Honey Creek Court, which is the circular court on the south side of Honey Creek Road. And then we'll get into kind of the pros and cons of the two alternatives. But the other alternative would be instead of running east-west from 120 on the south side of Honey Creek Road, to run it east-west on the north side of Honey Creek Road. So looking at those two alternatives, kind of put together what the ramifications or what the pros and cons might be for those alternatives. So if we stop the trail at Honey Creek Court on the south side, some of the bullet points is that it does not cross the town properties. However, it's still in the town right-of-way jurisdiction, but I think it'd be much more amenable to the town to stop it at Honey Creek Court. This provides connectivity to this development on the south side of Honey Creek Road. It does not, however, provide connectivity for future path extensions if we're to go east of Executive Drive, which was the current plan, is to stop the trail at Executive Drive. This, of course, cutting off that so many hundred feet to the east also would be less expensive in the long run. The alternative of extending it on the north side of Honey Creek Road provides connectivity for future extensions east of Executive Drive, should the village desire to do that. However, as a note, it still would cross one town parcel, again, on the north side, highlighted in green there. That is still a town of East Troy parcel, or in their jurisdiction. It's also likely that right-of-way acquisition would be needed from 3 parcels along that corridor. Currently, there's no right-of-way acquisition anticipated for the project as we have it designed. We're fitting it all inside the existing right-of-way. There are also additional utility conflicts on the north side near Executive Drive with some transformer pedestals. I think there's a village light that would also have to be moved or relocated as part of this north side alternative. As far as cost goes, it would be similar, obviously, to what we have laid out right now with the trail on the south side of the road. The limits of the trail are about the same. Impacts are about the same to drainage facilities and things like that. One key aspect, though, is a concern for safety. If we were to extend the path on the north side, it would require users to cross potentially mid-block to connect with Executive Drive Court on the south side. So that is one aspect. Whereas if the alternative showing it on the south side, the crossing of Honey Creek Road would be at the intersection, a controlled stop intersection at SDH 120. So moving forward, the way things are currently scheduled is we're anticipating getting preliminary plans done in the next month or two, getting final plans approved by Department of Transportation in January timeframe of 26, and then putting the project out for bid in late winter of 26 for construction starting probably once the construction season is ready to go in May of 26. And we anticipate it would take about 3 months for the construction to be complete. So we'd do it during the construction season of 26, and then it would be wrapped up in 26.
So just a reminder, too, that we're using a TAP grant from the Department of Transportation for this project, and they will want to weigh in on this as well. Kurt and I did meet with the DOT a few weeks back, and it seemed less favorable for them, I think, like it is for us, to have this mid-block crossing in this area with these speeds. The preferred route, I feel, is to try to cross Honey Creek Road at that controlled intersection or at Highway 120. But we had focused on these residential properties within the township, not realizing that the property to the east, to the west of that, which is the parcel is actually in the village, but the right-of-way is town. Inside that little dotted line there, that little island is all town jurisdiction. So we would still need the town's approval to come across Honey Creek Road and go on the south side. So I'm not sure how they feel about that.
My conversations with the chairman, the concern's not that, I don't think. I think the concern is the 3 residents and their objection to it. Is there any width to Honey Creek Road where we could do a painting of like a bike trail, like portion there or something on the road itself?
I don't know that would, I don't think that would be safe, just because of the speeds through there. I don't know that would make sense. I don't know, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean,
So you're saying stop the trail at Honey Creek Circle and then jog over into the pavement, and then, I see what you're saying.
There's a lot of people that walk Honey Creek Road now, that live in the apartments. They'll walk down Honey Creek Road, like Corporate Circle, and then they walk through the park and then come back out to Honey Creek Road. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that walk that already with their dogs and whatever, that I see when I'm out on patrol. So-
If we can construct the pink option, I think what's gonna happen then is people going to the lofts are just gonna walk through the Honey Creek development, because there are sidewalks that tie the two together. Now, that doesn't take you any further east of that, but I think for those 2 developments, it would be a good option.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to go with option 1 here for all the reasons you guys said. There just seems a lot of cons to the north side one, and you're still crossing a town parcel that's a resident. That resident then says, I don't want it, then we're right back into this conversation, and then we've also ended up with dealing all the utility issues that you raised. So I just think that there's a huge cost increase by going on the north side, plus the safety cost issues. So, I mean, should the jurisdiction, or something in this setup ever change in the future, I mean, we can always go another project later. So,
yeah, and I've had a similar situation on another project where it wasn't so much multi-jurisdiction, but when the project went out for bid, the costs were higher than what was budgeted, and they were allowed to break the project up. And if they came up with funding and at a later time, the DOT allowed them to basically segment the project for future extension.
yeah, I mean, our goal of getting to executive drive is that those individuals, if at work wanted to ride a bike or something down to the square, that, during lunch, that they could. I think, though, in my mind, that's 10, 20% of the whole purpose of this. The real reason for this are the residents that are there.
Right. And if they're, we'll call them commuter bicyclists going to work, they could, there's enough room westbound that they're safely out of the driving lane, and they can hop on the trail, in the northeast quadrant of 120 and Honey Creek Road too. That's fairly, without having to cross Honey Creek. That's what
What do you guys think?
I like the south side. I like that option.
Any increase in connectivity is going to be a plus. I don't find anything about this negative.
Kirk, can you provide a design update on the interstate underneath the bridges, where that's at, what it's starting to look like?
Yeah, we're looking at providing a barrier, like we'll call it a Jersey barrier, the concrete barrier between the shoulder and the new trail. We also will be providing crossings at the on-ramp and the off-ramp to I-43. So we still need to work with the DOT to get that finalized, but that coordination is, they've seen it. I mean, they've seen the layout. So the coordination with them is going to be ongoing. It's, the shoulder's wide enough there, you can almost not need a barrier, but I think just for safety's sake and the fact that it's 45-mile-an-hour speed limit plus whatever everybody's going out there above that, it just provides a safer situation with a barrier. So we're proposing that as part of the project.
And then, remind me again, on 120 as you go north, where does it cross back over?
Yeah,
Where did we say that?
it's at O'Leary, just north of O'Leary Lane. Probably zoomed in too much here, but
Yeah, it
there it
doesn't
is.
like you're zooming.
Yeah, so if you,
So is that dark purple part there, that's where you're talking about the concrete barrier?
correct,
Okay.
yep. So you can see, it's hard to tell, but just north of O'Leary Lane, you can see the the ramps, crossing the median, we'll be crossing the ditch and adding a large culvert pipe on the west side of 120, just north of O'Leary Lane, to pick up that, or to maintain that drainage pattern. And then crossing over and then heading south on the east side of 120. We've got a real tight spot right there where we cross because the property line takes a jog closer to 120. So it's kind of a pinch point that we've designed it so we're avoiding even a temporary easement. But, like I said, right now we have no, and the village has indicated they don't want any right-of-way acquisition as part of the project. So we're squeezing that in there and making it work. It's a 90-degree turn, obviously, but it's a stop condition to cross at this location.
And I know we're not putting lights along the whole way, but is there any need for changing in light, like at any of these intersections, in terms of lighting in the evenings or things like that?
So now that sounds like we've got a layout, we're going to start taking a look at our lighting needs. I know that the village has indicated an interest in providing some lighting here. So yeah, we will be taking a look at lighting, certainly at the crossings here.
And we definitely need something at O'Leary Lane because there isn't even a street light there today.
That's why I was asking that.
And
gonna
it's
mention
tapering
that.
down. It's a tricky area.
And then all the utility poles really run along the opposite side after O'Leary Crossing, so
The west
any
side?
lighting that goes across that entire area would have to have a substantial amount of poles set and whatever else.
Correct. And that was part of the original evaluation, going up the east side, west side. Those poles were factored in, but it still made more sense to cross over and be on the opposite side.
Right.
Thanks for evaluating the different options for us. I think it's pretty obvious, so you guys move forward with option one.
We got the direction we need?
Yep, so we'll take that back to DOT, just keep them in the loop. Obviously, we're using their funding and following their process, so. But I don't see that as being an issue. It's just a formality.
Jason, can you send me an email later this week with the portion that we talked about where the right-of-way is still the town there on that south part, like what I need to know, and I'll talk to Joe about that next week.
Yep, I'll get you something this week.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you need us to put something together too, an exhibit or something that's maybe clearer and zoomed in, just let me know.
All right, anything else?
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, item 4, consider purchase of bleachers for Centerfield Diamond at Ross Miller Sports Complex. Are you awake? You awake over there? Uh-huh.
Hi there. Okay, so after inspection of the bleachers at the Centerfield Diamond, which is at the Ross Miller Sports Complex, we determined they need to be replaced. We've been fixing them, and they're really bad right now. So I did include a picture. I think you guys all got that in my memo. And what we're looking at is that we had 2 projects come in under budget this year, the rec room and the sound system, both around $14,000. So total remaining funds was $29,409, and the bleachers would be complete $22,000. So I'm asking that we use the remaining funds from those 2 projects to get 2 new sets of bleachers. They are ADA compliant. The ones that are there now are not. They're actually really, really old. They've probably been there for 30-plus years, I would assume. So these would be the same exact ones we put at Mitchell Park. Like I said, they're ADA compliant, although we don't have a path up to it, but that's something we can look at in the future. So, any questions?
So not wood.
Not wood, no. They're aluminum.
I make a motion to approve the bleacher replacement at Ross Miller Sports Park.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Vicki.
Since we're talking about bleachers, I can't believe anyone everyone else didn't end on this. Come on, go Brewers today.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we got time. We'll see how fast we can be in closed session. All right, consider purchase of payload system for DPW loader.
Okay, so the next item we'll be talking about is our winter MOU with Walworth County. As you all know, we are able to pull salt from the East Troy Salt Dome. We're unique and we're the only municipality in the county that is able to go to a remote location to be able to get salt. Otherwise, everybody has to drive to Elkhorn. And we're able to do that because when the county wanted to construct the salt dome, they needed a variance from the airport. So there was an agreement put in place that the village could get salt from the county salt dome. So what they have said this year, though, is they would like us to use our own machine to load that salt into our trucks. And so we already have the machine. If we put this payload system on board of our existing machine, it gives us the ability to weigh the materials we're loading. And then I can provide a ticket to the county on how much salt we remove from the salt shed. And then they can bill us appropriately.
How did we do this? How did we settle up before with this idea?
So the county has a loader that they keep out at the salt shed, and it has a similar equipment on it. And we were just always able to use their machine. And now they have said, we would like you to have your own.
I'll make a motion to approve the purchase of a payload system from Miller Bradford for $8,845.10 using the surplus funds from the DPW future equipment purchases.
I'll second that.
Maybe you and I can have a conversation with Rick Stacy. I don't understand why this has to change. And
So the genesis of the changes that have, because there have been a few changes with the salt shed the last few years. Again, as I mentioned, we're unique. We're the only municipality that is able to do this. And I think the concern comes in that there's inventory concerns at the county. Now, the little bit of salt we use throughout the year, I don't think puts a dent in some of the issues they may have. I'm not really certain of. I'm just hearing some hearsay from some of their staff. But they've had some inventory concerns, and in my mind, this is a way to protect ourselves, that we know what we are getting is accurate. And again, this potentially, one day when we build our own salt shed, this is still a useful tool for us to have to know how much salt we utilize throughout the various events.
Question for you on that salt shed idea. Is this existing salt shed that the county currently owns, that's something that they would negotiate handing ownership over to us?
I know the Public Works Director had mentioned that to me at one point. Now, that was several years ago, so I don't know what the strategy is on that, if it's changed at all. But I haven't heard anything recently. I know now they put brine tanks out there, but, I mean, maybe it's an option someday down the road. I don't know.
Is it even something you'd want?
I mean, ideally, if and when we build a new public works shop, wherever that ends up, the salt shed also ends up in that same location. It wouldn't be the worst idea. I mean, obviously, it would be much better than the salt shed we have today, which we don't have one. So, ideally, we would build one when we build a DPW shop, but like I say, we don't have one today, so the village isn't that large. For us to take our loader from the DPW shop and drive it out there isn't the end of the world.
all right, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6, consider approval of winter MOU for purchasing salt. From purchasing salt from Walworth County.
And this is something that's typically on the consent. I had it on the miscellaneous agenda today because we were, the previous item, it was kind of pending approval of the previous item. This just sets the price in our allotment of salt for the year. As you can see, we didn't get anywhere near our allotment last year, so I don't think it's a concern, but again, we're due for a winter at some point, right?
You said it. Not, I didn't say it. You said it.
Make a motion to approve the winter MOU for purchasing salt from Walworth County.
I'll second that.
Questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, staff reports. Fire Chief's August 2025 report. Looks like ladder truck completion date March 2026. That's still good?
Yes, that is still the plan.
And I see the AEMT, we get 2 new members enrolled. That's great. All right, no other questions. Administrator's report, September 2025. Aileen?
Just going to highlight a couple of quick things. The big thing is that I had mentioned that Francine Peace had donated $5,000 to the skate park. She was a large supporter of that project ever happening. She did that in honor of Sue and Gary Badzine, and we've receipted that and we have earmarked that for the skate park. The Park and Rec Board will be discussing those funds and how they want to utilize those. Gave an update on those PFAS settlement checks, so we received the first 2. The next distributions will be over the next 8 years and quite a bit smaller than what we have received. In the opioid settlement information, I had underlined a couple things because the board had specific questions and I was reporting back, so I wanted to make sure I highlighted those. One of the questions was what was the projected timeline for settlement payments. She does not have, I spoke with somebody at our attorney's office, and she doesn't have the projected timeline, but she's anticipating, based on some information she has, that payments could begin sometime next year. There is a distribution chart by state, but not by municipality, so we have no idea what we're receiving. The use of funds is restricted. 95% of those funds must be used towards opioid remediation efforts. Other than that, the new utility clerk, Megan, started. She's doing really well. I hope you guys have a chance to meet her. And the East Troy McGuanago multi-use path, you will be receiving that planning study that is a final document now. So you'll be receiving that. We'll be discussing a resolution at the next meeting. Were there questions on anything else in the report?
4 new people in the village?
Yes, 4 people. I'm not sure if they all live in the same house or what, but
Danette, thanks for sticking it out, or a little bit early, but almost 1 year at this point.
All right, if no other questions or comments on that, move on to municipal court, September 2025. Questions there? And then, if not, Public Works Director's second and third quarter reports.
Right on time. Just a couple things I want to point out. Lake Bluff Phase 3, actually, since my memo here, curb and gutter has gone in, and I think either late this week or early next week, we'll start to see pavement go in. So we'll probably be talking about accepting that before the end of 2025. And then Clark Street angle parking seems to be working. I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to utilize it, but from what I see, it looks like, and I think Jeremy agrees, it seems to be working out pretty well.
Your team did an excellent job of crack filling in front of my house the other day.
Thank you.
All right. On to committee reports, Emergency Services District minutes from August 21st. Any questions for Scott? Or Scott, anything you want to highlight?
You want to know how I do the meetings so fast? Is that what you wanted?
I'm sorry?
You wanted to know how I do the meetings so fast?
Yes, share with us your secret. But I'm going to accuse Tyson of some typos there. All right, Booth Lake Memorial Park 2026 budget. Joe, anything you want to walk us through?
Yeah, I just want to highlight the capital improvements for 2026. So it's page 166, so reside, insulate, windows on the house, so it shows 35,000. The actual bid is 55, but Sean and Bonnie and John and others are contributing a lot of time, a lot of labor. So that's essentially the materials, the 35, but we're only asking for 20 because we have an extra 15 left over from this year. So the 55 went down to essentially 20 that we're asking for in capital improvements.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at, Jerry had sent me kind of a long email about this. And John, thank you for you and your family for all that you guys do out there and it's a lot of sweat equity here that's keeping these numbers down. So thank you for that. I think you guys operationally, kind of like we talked about the airport, much more self-sustaining out there, it sounds like. Okay. All right, then if no other questions on that one, then Booth Lake minutes from August 20th. All right. So preliminary closed session discussion, the need to go into closed session related to letters of intent received for a TID 4 and a TID 5 property, a development proposal within TID 4, a development proposal in a potential future TID, a collective bargaining agreement with the East Troy Professional Police Association, and to provide direction to staff on negotiation strategies and bargaining positions for those items. Anything else I should add? Okay. So I will move that we go to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 1985-1E to discuss the village's bargaining postures and negotiation strategies with respect to preliminary contracts as to possible future TID 4 and TID 5 developments, preliminary discussions related to proposed development for a future TID, and collective bargaining with East Troy Professional Police Association.
Second that?
Roll call, please.
President Johnson?
Yes.
Trustee Harding?
Here. Yes.
Trustee Holm?
Yes.
Trustee Moody?
Yes.
Trustee Nugent?
Yes.
Trustee